So, horror is a genre that is pretty popular on the internet, and is pretty popular just in general. Humans really like to be scared, but not in actual danger. But a recent thing that's been happening a lot is people talking about how, especially on the internet, and especially when it comes to horror games, there's a lot of people talking about how, like, oh, horror games aren't good anymore, they're not scary enough anymore. And it's not that they're not scary anymore, they actually still are really genuinely scary for most people, but there's other reasons why people don't think horror games are scary anymore. So that's what this video is going to be about, basically talking about why horror isn't scary enough anymore. But basically the first thing is, what is the main reason, and why do people say that, is basically because the main times where people have talked about that is especially with horror games. I have heard people talking about that with analog horror and ARGs, but the main thing is like, oh, FNAF isn't scary, which for those people who don't know, FNAF is a horror game, or like, oh, new horror games aren't scary anymore. And it's not that there has been a lot of new horror games that I don't think many people consider scary, the worst of which being Garden of Banban, which I have talked about before in another video, but Garden of Banban's a bad example, and it seems like surprisingly a lot of the bad horror games have actually been getting better. Like FNAF, which was probably one of the most popular horror video games, was basically with Security Breach, one of their games. When it came out during the pandemic, people pretty much hated it because it didn't seem scary. There was also a heaping load of reasons why people didn't like it, but one of the main criticisms was it doesn't feel like a horror game anymore. And the thing is that, and another example is Poppy Playtime, which is a game that seemed like it was going to be good, but didn't turn out to be. But both of them have gotten better. The recent FNAF Help Wanted 2 and FNAF Ruined DLC have both been extremely scary and good. They don't live up to the scariness of the first game, but they're better, and they're still legitimately scary in some points during the game. There's also the new FNAF game that's going to be coming out sometime soon, which looks really good, but Poppy Playtime also did that kind of thing where it went from being bad to being good again with its recent Chapter 3, which I also have a video on why it's so good. But that's kind of why it's weird. Horror games are considered not to be scary anymore, but then there's good examples of them still being scary. And the main reason why people don't think horror games are scary is there's two main reasons. The first one being, if you're playing horror games and watching horror stuff and consuming horror media in general, of course it's not going to be as scary after a while. So it's not like you're expecting, like, most people are like, oh, I wish horror games were as scary as they were when I first saw them. What they are actually still. What you're hoping is that they also got scarier as you got more resistant to horror things, because all horror things at some point kind of get a bit stale. Like, jump scares are now kind of not as scary as much. They still can be scary, but there's other things. And the thing is, a lot of these games that have used new and interesting ways to be scary have done it really effectively. Another reason is probably also because a lot of the people who are now saying FNAF isn't good, they were kids when they discovered FNAF, and now they've grown up, so that's part of the reason why. I've noticed that has happened with everything from Minecraft to YouTube channels. People are like, oh, the new version of this isn't good. That's because you were a kid, and it's just mostly nostalgia factor. Also, if you associate something with childhood, and you associate childhood with fun and good and stuff like that, then of course you're going to also associate that with being good and fun and amazing. So it's things like that where basically, horror is still scary, which is why it's not just you want scarier games, but instead of just asking for scarier games and complaining about games not being scary, you should probably instead actually look for video games that, or any horror media in general, that is something completely new, different, and interesting. There's tons of examples of horror games that mix up how to make horror effective. But that's basically the end of the video. I hope you like this. I've been wanting to make this video for a long time. It's kind of, I was inspired by other people's videos on this same topic, but I haven't seen many, which is kind of why I wanted to do this. I wanted to put out the idea that horror games are still scary a bit more. But yeah, it seems like recently, in the last few years, horror has been doing really good with some of these things. But yeah, I hope you liked this video. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.